Alright, YouTube, it's time for a rant on the concept of value, judgment, all associated things. Just a little bit of rumination here. Now, first, I may have fixed the audio. You can tell me if it's somewhat better. I think I fixed the grounding issue that was responsible for most of the buzzing. Most of the other interference you're likely to hear is the breeze right now, because I'm on the breezeway. And it's breezy outside, so you're probably hearing a little bit of wind and rain. We've been having showers basically from the afternoon on, and it shows no signs of stopping. We've actually got a flood watch out in effect. Thank goodness I live on the top of a hill. Anyways, I wanted to talk about the notion of judgment from this perspective. I tend to reject the judgments that others levy against me, whether they're well intentioned or not. And I tend to focus on things that I find valuable and I find interesting without respect to what other people do. Most people, as they go through life, their goal is their first goal is, well, graduate from high school, I guess. Then their goal is graduate from college, or they just go into the workforce. Then their goal is to work hard, get ahead, get paid for what they do, get the car, get the house, get the picket fence, maybe have a kid or two sometimes. And my understanding of the spiritual realm from my own perspective leads me to the following conclusion. I believe that if I were to live that sort of life, then when I'm old, when I'm 75, 80 years old, if I make it that long with my Red Bull intake being what it is, okay, 55 or 60, when I'm older, when I look back at my life and I ask myself that sort of final fundamental question, and am I satisfied with what I did with my life? I think my answer under that circumstance would be no. I have a feeling that a lot of others feel the same way. I think a lot of people sort of go into religion, organized religion, that sells them some sort of absolute answer to all of their problems, specifically because when they look at their own life, they're unfulfilled by it. And so they want to think that there's something better beyond. Now, in the olden days of antiquity and sort of the medieval era in that time period, of course, people weren't generally fulfilled. Even people who were wealthy by the standards of that time period, the dude with the castle and his private army, sort of the feudal lord or the king or whatever, even they were subject to that same generally fairly early mortality, lack of understanding of the world, general unfulfillment by means of the fact that they had little in the way of technology and primarily ate cabbages and turnips, and if they were lucky, they actually had milk. Naturally, they would flock to religion because religion said, well, yeah, life sucks. We understand that too. By the way, pay us lots of money so that we don't have to live the Rubish way that you do. But no, there's a better life beyond, so don't worry about that. Just give us some of your money and trust us and listen to what we say, and then you'll get to go to heaven when you die. And then there's no suffering, there's no want or need, and you'll have milk and honey all the time in a street of gold. That's what they sell them. But today, I ask this, is the average person any more fulfilled than somebody that lived to an average age of 45 or 50 back in the medieval era? I think the answer is probably no. I think that most people live that same boring, largely unfulfilled life. When we're little kids, we say, well, we dream about all the things that we want to do. I want to be an astronaut. I want to be the president. I want to be rich, rich, rich. I want to go stand on the moon. I want to build a laser death machine and take over the world. Depending on who you ask. A troubled little Timmy over there is still talking about necromancy. But all these different kids will give you these different dreams that they want to achieve when they're younger. When they get a little bit older, they get so caught up in living in the moment, I guess, for sex and money and fame or fortune or whatever, that they sort of forget those dreams, and very few people actually get to pursue them, and even some of them don't get to pursue it to the lengths that they want to. You might think of somebody who manages to get into sort of a sheltered academic existence that gives them some peace of mind, it gives them some autonomy as to what they're doing in their job, some general degree of wealth and freedom, Most other people are really automatons when you think about it. They're told what to think in school, and they learn how to think there. They go to their job, they're told what to do. And then they don't even get most of the productivity that they themselves are creating. Most of it's going to some manager or boss, or to some collective investment fund that's managed by the business itself. They're taking home pennies on the dollar of what they're actually worth, even if they're doing the most menial of tasks. They work in a garbage dump or as a janitor or something. So I look at that sort of life and I say, would I be fulfilled on my deathbed if I lived that sort of life? No. In a way, somebody who is a homeless bum wandering around eating trash is living a more fulfilling existence than some of these middle-class people that honestly feel like they've made it. They've got that nagging sort of feeling that there's something amiss, but they sort of ignore it. And when they have a heart attack at 50, and suddenly what money they've squirreled away is very quickly exhausted and leaves their family in ruins without a leg to stand on, and they sell the house and move into a double wide and feel like everything's wrong in the world, and dad can't work anymore because of his heart attack, and now mom's doing double shift at Wendy's or something. Then that's the worst thing in the world to them, because they've built up their lives around the illusion that little that they've actually got, which is killing them to begin with, is actually ambition, it's actually progress, it's fulfilling in some way. I look beyond that and I say I would rather have a spiritually fulfilling life, one in which I do primarily the things that I want to do, primarily derive the benefit from my own initiative. And I say, in a way, the bastardization of capitalism, which has led to corporatism, which is not true capitalism by any means, by the way, has really sapped the soul out of most of the Western world. That's what I've come to the conclusion of. You look at these workaday drones, they're not working for themselves. Their own initiative, their own ambition is stifled. Their own thoughts and dreams and potential is no longer being acted upon. There was a brief window in history when this was not the case, when the system that we used was primarily actual capitalism, because as new parts of the country opened up, people who wanted to be self-led simply moved there. They farmed their own land, or they refined their own metal, or they smithed their own guns. They built their own plows and wagons. They fell their own trees. They did all sorts of things. That nobody told them that was what they were supposed to be doing. They simply said, fuck this life here in the East. I'm going west of the Mississippi because there's trees out there that I want to cut down. There's a river that I want to set up a ferry on. There's a road that needs to be built. There's a rail that needs to be built. Somebody's got to open a cannery in this location. This area could really use a set of docks. And they did that on their own. They weren't told to do it. It wasn't generally regulated at all. They simply moved out to a remote rural location and did what they wanted to do. That is the greatest period of expansion in human history. It is the greatest period of expansion in any time that human beings have ever resided upon the planet Earth. And in fact, if you look back at antiquity, in many cases where a culture was pushing against the boundaries of what was then wilderness, that was also an age of expansion at the time. You get people who congregate in these areas. It's not like ancient Rome where they were concentrating in a cosmopolitan area, because they already had the basic agriculture and everything else, and they were already settled. They were just building, the most technology that they could get their hands on. It wasn't like that. It was open, fallow land. The only people there were Native Americans who primarily had already been decimated by disease and really didn't pose a threat beyond hurling a few spears at your farmhouse in the middle of the night. And I'm allowed to say that without being racist because I'm part Abenaki, so shut the fuck up, social justice warriors. No, when I look back at my life, I don't want to say, well, I was a good worker, I made a good wage, I have a decent house and a decent car, but ultimately nobody's going to remember me. Nobody's going to care that I ever existed. There are a billion other people that do exactly what I did. That is not the way that I want to look back at my life, and I've met people that don't seem to understand this. Their goal in life is to get ahead by reaping egotistical titles upon themselves, being someone by being a professional or academically accredited or they want a lot of money. They want to raise their kids with nannies because they're going to be too busy working to make more and more money. And then they're going to be buying a lot of things that continuously cost them most of their income anyway, so that if something goes wrong, they're screwed. They end up just as penniless as somebody who is making minimum wage and had a stroke or something. The way in which we have managed the world predominantly destroys creativity, and this starts in kindergarten and goes all the way up to the grave, from cradle to grave, quite literally. We've got government that primarily stifles actual competition, actual dreams, actual advances in technology through its regulatory structure. And this is a sad fact in most of the world. There are parts of the world that are very, very remote where this doesn't happen, but in those areas, they're a constant civil war, so you're no better off. They're like the medieval era. There, your life is also miserable. It's just miserable for different reasons. You're not a slave to anyone unless you get shot in the head. Otherwise, it's okay. You can farm your banana crops or whatever you're growing. Because nobody's going to care until they come and raid your crops, rape your daughters, burn your sons alive, and cut your head off. No, when I look back on my existence, I want to say that I'm proud of things that I took the initiative to do. I don't want to be proud for having worked for somebody else and made a minor name for myself. I don't want to work for somebody else my entire life and get old and gray. And never do any of the things that I wanted to do, which is primarily how the system that we use in most of the world is set up. Most people will never amount to anything other than to produce for other individuals. So my suggestion to my subscribers would be exactly the same thought that I had. Whatever you're doing now this doesn't really apply to people who are fortunate enough to have gotten into academics, because there's some leeway there. You're allowed to think for yourself more in academics as long as the way you think is roughly in line with the way the other academics are thinking. Otherwise, you tend to get fired if you don't have tenure already. You know, you're sort of like the tenured nutty professor, working until you die at your desk like Einstein or something like that. That can be a fulfilling life if the person's, researching something that they happen to really, really enjoy. More power to them. But for the average individual, that's not what they do for a living. Even people who have like PhDs and master's degrees, often they're still not an academic in that same sense. They're not the Indiana Jones that gets to go out a couple months every year and basically have an extended field trip digging around for fossils or something. Whatever you're doing now, think about yourself at 65 or 70, or a little less if you drink as much caffeine as I do and you fully expect to die of a stroke at some point. Think of yourself looking back on your own life and ask yourself, is it a fulfilling life? It will fill you with dread most likely, because the answer is very likely to be no. That's the problem. I refuse to live such an existence. Other people might be okay with it, and some people are willing to self-delude. They'll say, well, yeah, but this is just temporary. I'll be out of this minimum wage ass pizza joint job in a few years, and I'll be a clerical worker, and then I'll work my way up, and pretty soon I'll be a corporate CEO or something. Well, even the corporate CEO is going to look back at their life and judge themselves. And they're not going to be any happier than the minimum wage workers they usually exploited as part of their business operations. Because they got plenty of money. They don't have a problem about money. They probably had plenty of women or men or animals or whatever the hell they happen to be into. They probably had plenty of that because they get the sports cars and mini bars and things like that. They have the mansion and all that stuff, but they're old and gray. They base their entire life on having power over other people. Now they don't even have power over their own bowels. How pissed off do you think they're going to be? They're just as poorly off as that janitor that makes $20K a year and lives in his double wide. He goes home and has chronic insomnia because he can't turn the fucking TV off at night. I don't want to look back at my life and judge myself by somebody else's wacky standards of what constitutes right and wrong, or what constitutes having made it in life or having achieved some sort of goal. It's like I always said, well, I want to write books. Well, I have now. There's something I can check off my bucket list already. I'm not even 30 years old and I've already written several books. So when I'm on my deathbed, that's one less thing I have to fucking worry about. I'm probably doing pretty well compared to most people. Money means absolutely nothing. Money is a means to purchase a bunch of goods. Yeah, you need money to survive. We all fucking know that fact. Most of the things that people think that they need, though, are ultimately things that they want. They're not even actual needs. You can, if you choose, live in a pup tent and live off of nothing but, your own garden and some canned beans or something like that, if that's what you're really into. There are people that do that. There are survivalists in communes full of hippies where they grow most of their own food, sometimes raise livestock. That's a little bit butcherous, but it's no different from McDonald's, let's face it. And at least it's free range and organic, non-GMO pigs that you just, slit the throat of, I guess. There are people that do that, and they live in a cabin. They live in a pup tent or something like that. And that's how they get by. When people try to judge one another for their own accomplishments, most of what I see is a bunch of nonsense. Because most of the time, you'll see, for instance, somebody who thinks that they have made it in life because they've got above the median income and they've got a little bit nicer than normal, box-shaped house in a nicer than normal suburban neighborhood overseen by a housing authority that tells them how long their fucking grass can be and how often it has to be fertilized and chemically treated. They're not changing the world. They're no different than the people that they look down on for being in the lower middle class or something. They're exactly the same. They're identical. They're essentially robots when you really think about it. That's the way that they operate. Most of what they do is they get told what to do. They don't have an original thought and say, oh, you know what I think I should do? I should climb that mountain because it's there. I should build my own fucking pirate ship, sail across the Atlantic, and go to and visit Portugal. You could theoretically do that if you were willing to put the time and effort into doing that. Most of the laws, regulations, and societal norms that you see around you are utterly and completely arbitrary. People, they don't even really need law enforcement anymore. 99% of the population will just follow this sort of unwritten social code to their graves without realizing it's utterly arbitrary. You can do all of these so-called crazy things. They're not really that crazy. Many of them have been done before. If some idiot back 2,000 years ago can design a trireme and sail it across the Mediterranean, well, by goodness, you can build a pirate ship and go sail it around if you're really into that sort of thing. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do what you want to do. If I had $1 for all the times that people that didn't like me told me that I would never write a book and sell a single copy, I'd have more money than I got from the book. But, yeah, it's happened now. So who's fucking laughing now? I've had exes who have basically said the same thing. Oh, well, this is just a bunch of bullshit. Nobody wants to read this gory, disgusting nonsense. Who's laughing fucking now? So I'm going to look back on my life and I'm going to judge myself, and I'll probably be pretty damn pleased. And whatever cosmically comes after, when I finally pass out for the fucking last time, and when my brain starts to turn to goo and seep out through my ears and nose, and when my meat-coated skeleton begins to degrade into just a skeleton, and all of that meat comes sloughing off in fungal sheets, and my intestines start blistering and foaming and expanding out of my guts and surging from my asshole, I'm probably going to be fairly happy. Because I'll have done at least some of the things that I wanted to do, and I will have taken the initiative to do them myself. Nobody encouraged me. Nobody told me what to do. I did it. And I will be happy for that. Even if I never accomplish anything else, if I die tomorrow, at least I've got that going for me. Whatever comes after is inconsequential. I'm convinced it's reincarnation. I'm convinced the Buddhists are technically right and that actually it's not karma. It's just sort of you're judging yourself because your own mental functions begin to break down in your head, and time begins to feel like it's moving really slowly in those last few moments where you're sort of half dead, half alive. And so your brain's sort of just wildly firing, and a lot of the stuff that you've ever done or heard is like randomly flashing across your third eye or something. I'm convinced that that's what happens. I'm sure it won't be that pleasant, unless a person's, blind, deaf, and mute, and thus is experiencing much the same that they did when they were alive, and nothing really added to that for the most part. But it will be more bearable, I think, for those who are capable of looking at their own lives, judging themselves, and saying, well, yeah, I'm pretty satisfied. I don't think there were any, particularly big mistakes I made, and I did some of the things I wanted to do. Yeah, that's all right. That life was pretty good. As opposed to somebody who on their deathbed, they're like, oh no, shit, I didn't climb Mount Kilimanjaro like I always wanted to. God damn it, now I'm a corpse. I can't climb Kilimanjaro. That's going to completely freak them out when they're on their deathbed, when they're dying. They're going to think back to that because it's probably been in their head for years and years and they forgot to do it. They forgot because they were so busy living, aka just existing and primarily working for somebody else's benefit. Well, I'm not the person to ask if you want something done so that you can benefit off of my labor. It's just not going to happen. I'm way too independent. I've always been a rebel. Since I was a very young child, I've always rebelled against authority. I've always had a problem with people telling me to do things that didn't make sense to me. Well, upon further review of the spiritual world, I find it doesn't really make sense for me to work for anybody but myself. And so if I can be completely self-learned, if I can be self-led and do my own thing and get by and survive that way, there is absolutely no reasoning in the world you could use to convince me, even with a high salary and a sports car, that I should abandon what I'm doing now for doing something else. There's no reason to, because that's not actually rewarding. What the hell does it matter? You could have $1 billion, you're still gonna die. You're going to die. You are mortal. It doesn't matter if they cryogenically freeze you. You're still gonna end up, second they thaw you out, you're gonna, fold onto the floor and start withering and falling apart from apoptosis in all of your skin cells, and your organs will just be everywhere. You'll be soup. What's the purpose to amassing wealth? Unless the exception would be if you can get wealthy doing something that honestly, intellectually, and emotionally fulfills you, then by all means go for it. If that's the case, like if I wanted to write a book and fantasy book or whatever, and it became a bestseller, I'd say, okay, well, I made a lot of money doing what I wanted to do. That's fine. But using that as the ultimate goal in your life, you're feeding your own ego and your own wallet, just seems pointless to me. Because a lot of people, the way they go about it is by doing things that they don't really want to do. Who really wants to stand there in front of the fry vat or at their desk, at their computer, in their clerical position? CEOs, do you really think that many of them want to go to all those fucking meetings? No, probably half of them would rather go play with some fucking Legos, but they can't do that because of money. And they've locked themselves into their own spending patterns, which tend to be so atrocious. People tend to spend just below their means. So then they end up enslaving themselves. They don't even need somebody else to do it for them. No matter how successful they are, their spending will catch up to whatever they're making, and they'll still basically be poor, because they're spending most of their income, no matter how high it happens to get, on maintaining the luxuries they've grown accustomed to. They wouldn't be comfortable in a log cabin where they've got dial-up and just a single air conditioner. They'd think that they were living in the fourth world, but some people would consider themselves fortunate to have such a setup. It's rather strange to see the behaviors of humankind. Humans are fascinating to me. This is why I studied anthropology. When I think about these things deeply, I mean, not in an ironic sort of, well, I think I should go hippie-trippy and talk about a bunch of new age hippie bullshit way, but when I really start thinking about how I would judge myself on my deathbed, it really makes me wonder how people can live these lives. It makes me wonder how these people can be fulfilled, and it also makes me wonder who told them it was a good idea to live that way. I don't think it is. I mean, these people, they live their entire life in a concrete box, basically. They don't get to feel the sunshine on their face. They don't get to eat fresh berries. They don't grow anything. They don't make anything of their own. They just do what they're told to do. My goodness, what kind of a fucking life is that? They're going to get old, and they're going to regret that. I think 99% of the human population is really going to regret the way that they're living. The worst thing is we don't need to live that way, by the way. We have it in our technology now. We could replace our entire energy infrastructure with green energy and automate almost all of this stuff and let people wander around composing poetry. It'd be like sort of a utopian ancient Greece. We could theoretically do that worldwide. We could do it within the next 10 years. You know why we're not doing that? Because then people would start to get restless. They would eventually fight with one another in some way. Or they would get very, very lazy. They'd get really, really fat and obese or something like that. So it's a problem. But yeah, theoretically, we could have a world like that, and we could have it fairly quickly, within our lifetimes. Very likely within my lifetime, that could be brought about with a concerted effort. The problem is there's no will to attain it. The human race has lost its collective will to build heaven. And so we're going to hell. That's where the world is going, because we've stopped endeavoring for that final goal that we really should have kept working on. We sort of lost our will around the interwar period when we saw the horrors there, when you saw dudes with 1,000-yard stare with a missing foot from having gotten soaked in rat-infested trenches for a week. Must have been pretty scary to see. Oh, by the way, this is nothing to do with the rest of this video. Have you ever seen the pictures of those masks that they gave to like disfigured soldiers from World War I? To sort of cover up their injuries? Because I mean, some they have like half their jaws missing, an eye's gone, and part of their skull and stuff. And they gave them these weird, ghoulish-looking masks to wear that sort of hid the fact that they were missing chunks of their face. But the masks make them look even creepier than if they just had a chunk taken out of their face. I think that crushed. That period of time was so brutal it actually crushed the human will to see beauty in the world. And then basically people said, peace at all costs. We don't care how much you enslave us because this is just too much. We don't want to get shelled with poisonous gas anymore. But yeah, just some thoughts on life in general. I'm feeling rather introspective and philosophical. Fucking hippie stuff. But yeah, some thoughts on that. That's about all. Peace out.